I have been wearing this palette every day for 1 week, and this is my honest review. What's up, friends? Welcome back to my channel. I hope you all are doing well. Today, we have a highly requested review of the new Makeup by Mario Ethereal Eyeshadow Palette. I am going to be diving into this palette, letting you guys know the pros and cons, really helping you with your purchase decision. I have two looks to show you today, a natural look and this glam look that I created earlier today. I'm going to be doing some up-close daylight swatches and all of the comparisons that you guys requested. So if you're curious about this palette, you want to know my thoughts, you want to know if you should get this, then keep watching. And if this happens to be your first time here, maybe you found me in a YouTube search or browsing YouTube, then welcome. My name is Sophia, and this is my channel where we talk about all things beauty and luxury. Every single week, I upload new videos on all the newest beauty releases out on the market. So if you love makeup, if you love especially higher end brands or Sephora brands, then you're in the right place, my friend. Hit that subscribe button to join our fam, and you can also click the notification bell to hear about every time I upload a new video. This video is for you all. You requested it, so don't forget to give your girl here a big thumbs up. It really helps me out. I would very much appreciate it. And as always, I'll be linking everything that I mentioned in this video, anything that is on my face, what I'm wearing, the comparison palettes in that description box down below. Most of my links are affiliate links, so shopping through those links this holiday season really helps to support my channel. Okay, party people, let's dive into this review because we have quite a bit to talk about today. I have a lot of thoughts about this palette. So like I said, this is the newest palette from Mario. This retails for a whopping $68, which is more expensive than probably we were expecting from Mario. It does seem like he's trying to enter more of a luxury high-end sort of tier, and that's also why I wanted to review this for you all, because it's pretty expensive. It's more than like an ABH palette. Mario is putting himself in the same tier as Patrick Ta at this point, which I thought was really interesting. I thought Patrick Ta palettes were a little bit cheaper, but I just checked the price and they're actually exactly the same. This product has a 12-month shelf life, and it says on the back here that this is manufactured in the United States and it is assembled in the Dominican Republic. Reading a little bit about this palette, it says on Sephora, this is Mario's dream palette with 12 new signature shades that create effortless ethereal eye looks. It features 3 unique finishes, suede mattes, natural metallics, and a first ever glossy shimmers. The suede mattes offer enhanced grip for rich color, natural metallics feature micronized pigments for a seamless application, and glossy shimmers, a first of its kind formula, are infused with pearls coated with emollient binders to impart a reflective, wet-like shine on lids. I'm going to be diving into each of those formulas and letting you guys know my thoughts on how they compare to other brands. I did also want to show you guys the packaging. I was pretty impressed by the packaging. This is actually a metal component, and if you are familiar with some of Mario's other products, they're more of like a plasticky type of component, and this is quite weighty. I have to admit, I really like the packaging, even though it keeps getting dirty and I have to keep cleaning it off. I want to say this really does feel like a luxury component packaging wise. Let's dive into some swatches, starting off with the suede mattes. So these are all of the matte shades in the palette. I just swatched them in sort of a gradation from light to dark. Notice how in this palette, even though it is a very neutral palette, there is not a black shade. So I do want to point that out. We do get a very deep chocolate brown. I was kind of afraid that there wasn't going to be a lot of depth in this palette, but I must say the darkest brown shade, it is pretty dark, but just want to call out, we don't have anything that's really close to a black at all in this palette. Something else that I want to point out about this matte formula in particular, and I have some close-ups here to kind of demonstrate what I mean. They are extremely powdery, almost like cornstarch powdery. If I dip my brush into that pan, it really has a lot of kick up, way more than an ABH formula, for example. It does get a little bit messy. These are extremely finely milled. So I'll kind of talk a little bit more about how that performs on the eye a little bit later, but you can even see with a close-up on my finger just how much pigment picks up. So typically when you see swatches of this formula, I do think that the swatches, they impart a little bit more depth than when you actually apply them on the eye. Next up, we have the natural metallic shades, and I do just want to point out which ones they are in the palette. It is this one and this one. So there are only 2 in the palette. I'll show you a close-up of what these look like. These are kind of like your traditional metallic shade. They do have an opaque base. They're very high shine. They are shimmery, but notice how we only get 2. And also notice how each of them are pretty deep. There isn't a lighter shade in the palette with this formula, so that is a big call out that I want to make. The natural metallics, similar to the matte shades in the palette, they do produce quite a bit of kick up, you know, it gets a little bit chunky in the pan. I would say once it goes onto the eyes, it's pretty smooth. But I want to mention that as well. This palette it can be a bit messy. If you're someone that doesn't like a lot of kick up or fallout, this palette might not be for you. Now for what is arguably the best part or the most unique part of this palette, and those are the glossy shimmers. And I want to point out which ones those are right here in the palette. Those are these three in this row right here. So we've got kind of the matte spread throughout. We have the two metallic shades right here. And then here we have the glossy shimmers. Let me show you guys a close-up swatch of what these look like. These are supposed to impart a glossy, shimmering, sparkly, wet look. I'm sure at some point in your life you guys have seen the sun sparkling on the waves of the water. That's kind of what this reminds me of. It's very ethereal, just like the palette is called. But one thing that I will note, comment down below if you guys agree with me, these all look pretty similar. Notice how these are not opaque. These are more like topper shades. They don't have that much of a base. This is where we get the lighter colors within the palette. And don't get me wrong, I know that they have different undertones, but at the end of the day, I still think that these are, you know, quite similar to each other. Now that we are oriented with this palette and we've seen the swatches, I'm going to be getting into the demos. The first demo is going to be a super natural, wearable day look that I think a lot of you guys would just create for going to work or just for every day. And then the second look is going to be the look that I have today, which is the more glam look. So let's dive into look number one, the natural look. So the first thing that I did is I went in with the shade EE3 in the crease. This is very basic, light beige type of shade. This is going to be a good transition shade for somebody who's super fair like me. I would say that the first time I dipped into these matte shades, I was not prepared for how powdery the formula was. I don't necessarily think that they are hard to blend, but I would be careful, guys, if you use a eyeshadow base or if you use a very thick or more sticky type of concealer. I would be careful with that because I think you're gonna have a hard time blending these. I think that they are going to be patchy because they might catch on more of like that sticky base. So I would almost say powder your eyelids before you go in with these mattes because it's either gonna get patchy and or you're gonna get hard pan. Next up, I went in with the lightest shade in the palette, which is called EE1 all over the lid. This is just your plain everyday bone color. It's really good for blending out some of the darker colors. And the reason why I go in with this on the lid and not one of the shimmers is because, like I said, there is not a lighter metallic in this palette to do a super light natural look. All we have are those topper shades. So what I like to do is I like to first put on this lighter shade, EE1, all over the lid. And then I like to go in with one of the glossy shimmers. And I do have another close-up right here just to show you how much kick up there is in the pan when I use this shade. Next up, I added just a little bit more depth. I went into the shade EE7, which is a slightly deeper but still light brown. And I went in with that on the outer lid to start adding some depth. I also took that same shade EE7 and I put that on the lower lash line. And I also went in with EE1, which is that lightest shade, in the inner corner just to brighten up the inner corner because once again, I do not have a lighter metallic to put there. Finally, I went in with the glossy shimmers. In this case, I started out with the shade EE2. This is one of the lightest ones. I think it's probably sort of like a champagne sort of tone. I went in all over the lid. One of my biggest tips for using these glossy shimmers is to use a wet brush. Like I said, I've been using this palette every single day for a week, playing around with it, seeing what works best. And you do get quite a bit of fallout, not just when you are using the palette, but also even more so, I would say, as you wear your look throughout the day. These glitters, these glossy shimmers, they do tend to fall onto the tops of my cheeks. And I have seen a big difference when I just go in with the wet brush. It's also going to prevent the shimmers from potentially falling into your eye, potentially irritating your eyes. I would be very careful with these glossy shimmers. If you're going to be putting them in the inner corner, definitely use more of like a glitter glue or like a mixing medium, because once again, at the end of the day, these are glitters and you do have the potential of irritating your eye. The last thing I did, I just wanted to create a little bit more brightness, and I also wanted to see how these glossy shimmers layered on top of each other. So I went in with the more gold tone one, which is EE10. I popped that in the center. It's just a tad brighter. It's not that different, like I said earlier, but it's a little bit brighter. Finally, I applied my mascara, and this is our first look. Comment down below and let me know what you think. I know that this is super basic. Really, the only thing that stands out here are the glossy shimmers, but nonetheless, it's a really beautiful look, and I wanted to show you guys what this would look like if I were to do just kind of like my everyday, not going out, not a glam kind of look. Now I'm going to dip into some of the deeper colors in the palette and show you how I got this glam look that I have on my eyes today. So starting off with one of the more cooler tone shadows, I went in with number EE5 in the crease. Again, similar formula to the rest of the mattes. Next up, I went in with the shade EE11 on the lid. This is one of those metallic shades. This is probably one of my favorite shades in the palette because it is very high shine and it's also opaque. This is the lightest metallic that we have in the palette, so this is the one that's really gonna help me get my glam looks. But that being said, I do wanna just point out, because this is really the main metallic that I have to use in this palette, whenever I do a more glam look, a lot of the times they end up looking pretty similar because I'm constantly using this shade. I also dipped into the more chocolate brown metallic shade. This is number EE8, and I applied this more so to the outer part of the lid. This one is softer than EE11. It doesn't have as much of a high shine, which I kind of appreciate because there's a little bit more differentiation that we're getting here. And this is probably the shade that applies the easiest and the best throughout the whole palette because you don't get a lot of kick up. It's not as like chunky and shimmery as the other metallic. It's probably like the most effortless shade that we've got. To match up the look on the lower half of the eye, I also went in with EE8 and EE11 on the lower lash line. Then I dipped into some deeper shades. I went into EE9 on the outer corner. That is that chocolate brown shade to start blending and adding a little bit more depth. Then I went into the deepest shade in the palette, EE12, with kind of a denser, pointier crease brush, and I just started creating more definition in the outer V. I wanted to see how much I could deepen this up. I do think that you can build these mattes up, but because they are so powdery, they are not gonna be like a Pat McGrath matte, if that makes sense. If you're used to that type of density, I don't really think that you're gonna get that from this palette, so I wanna call that out. I also went into the lightest shade in the palette, EE1, just to blend everything out. As boring as this shade is, it is very practical. I use something like this all the time when I'm creating these looks, just to blend around the edges. This is how you get that soft, diffuse, and dare I say, ethereal kind of look. I started to put on some mascara and eyeliner, and then I realized we did not go into the glossy shimmers, but I caught myself, don't worry. I dampened my brush with a little bit of water and I went into the shade EE6. This is my favorite shimmer that's in the palette. I don't know why, it just has a really beautiful tone to it, and I applied that into the center of the lid once again with a wet brush. Then I finished applying my liner and mascara, and this is the final look. This is our more glamorous type of look. Comment down below, let me know what you think of this. Which look did you like better? And also, more importantly, are these looks that you guys think you could recreate on your own at home? I hope that those demos were helpful. Now it is time for arguably the most important part of this video. This is going to be the comparison section. If you don't want to see the comparisons, I totally understand. I include timestamps with every single video I do, so you can always jump to my final thoughts. But these are the palettes that you guys asked me to compare. Some of you guys watch my channel specifically for the comparison, so let's dive into your requests. The first palettes I wanted to compare, and I mentioned these when I talked about my first impressions of this palette in my Sephora haul. These are the palettes from Wayne Goss. First up, we have the Wayne Goss Smokey Quartz palette. This is one of his newer palettes that came out this year. Right off the bat, you can kind of tell the Wayne Goss Smokey Quartz palette, it's a little bit more purple toned, which is perfectly fine. I still think that's a beautiful tone, and it's still quite natural. I also want to mention that the Wayne Goss formula in general, it's a softer formula. He really doesn't have high shine metallics. It's more of a satin. I also think that the mattes, quite frankly, I'm always honest, I like his mattes better. I think that they are easier to blend. There's not as much kick up. They are a more luxurious formula in my opinion. And the biggest thing that I want to compare here, guys, are the topper shades, because most of Wayne Goss's palettes, they come with a beautiful pearlized topper shade. And as soon as I looked at this Mario palette, I instantly thought of these shades from Wayne Goss. So I want to show you guys side by side the topper shade that comes in the Wayne Goss Smoky Quartz and my favorite one, EE7 from the Mario palette. Can you tell the difference between these? Because I cannot. These literally look the same to me. Some people are telling me that they're different. I don't agree. I'm always honest with you guys. These look exactly the same to me. I also want to show you guys the Wayne Goss Pearl palette. I think in what we were lacking from the Smoky Quartz palette, we have it in the Pearl palette. This is a little bit lighter in tone. And I'll show you guys the side-by-side swatches. These are so similar. I don't know about you guys. I think these are so So similar, and once again, the Pearl palette has another beautiful topper shade that you can use just like the ones in the Mario palette. I'll show you all three of them side by side. I think that if you have these two palettes from Wayne Goss, you really don't need the Mario one. And quite frankly, if you're someone that doesn't like a lot of kick up in the pan, or maybe you want a little bit more of like a softer, elegant look, I think the Wayne Goss ones are a better option, especially for those of you out there that have more mature skin. Wayne designs those palettes more for that market, or at least to suit everybody. The other product that I instantly thought of when I saw this Mario palette are the Hourglass Scattered Light singles. I have like 2 or 3 of these, I think, and the main one that I wanted to show you guys is the shade Smoke. So I'm showing you guys the shade Smoke once again up against EE7. I still, these are not the same. They're not as close as the Wayne Goss one, but they are very similar. The Hourglass has more of a pigmented base, which I'll be honest, I kind of prefer that more, but the Mario ones have more of that super ethereal, like otherworldly, wet kind of look. But if you don't like something that is that glittery, or you don't want to buy a whole palette, you really were just interested in those shimmery topper shades in the Mario one, then you can always just purchase an Hourglass single. I'm sure they're going to be having a bunch of sales this Black Friday. In fact, I'm almost positive that they will. So keep a lookout for the Hourglass Scattered Light singles. A lot of you all asked me for comparisons with the Patrick Ta palette. Now, unfortunately, I do not have the first palette that he launched, which I know is going to be more similar in tone to this one from Mario. But in terms of comparing the formula, I do have the volume 2 that he launched earlier this year that I reviewed for you all. I know that these colors are not the same, but I do want to show you just a comparison of the shimmers. That's really the big thing that you guys asked me about. How do the shimmers compare? And you know what? I think that the shimmers that you're getting from the Patrick Ta palette, it's a very similar formula to the metallics that you get in the Mario palette. But the Patrick Ta shimmers, they really are not similar at all to the glossy shimmers that you're getting in the Mario palette. Those have a more pearlized finish, and they are more like toppers. They don't have a metallic base. So you really don't get the same kind of look, in my opinion, from the Patrick Ta. But if you're someone that you want less glitter and you want more metallic, the Patrick Ta formula is probably a better option. I also wanted to compare the shimmers in the Mario palette up against the Blitz Astral shades that we see from Mother Pat McGrath. So right here I have her latest palette. This is Mothership 10 Moonlit Seduction. And I just wanted to show a side-by-side of the Astral shades from that palette up against the shimmers that are in the Mario palette. The Pat McGrath ones, they're a little bit more brighter and more impactful, whereas the Mario ones, they're softer, more ethereal. That being said, if you have a lot of Pat McGrath palettes, you probably already have like a ton of shimmers and a lot of Astral shades. So I just want to call that out, let's think about how different these shades actually are. I also received a lot of requests to compare this palette up against the Tom Ford Metal Lust Quad. I know that this was limited edition and you can't get it anymore, but that being said, a lot of you guys have this and you want to see a side by side. Because these are both neutral palettes, you definitely can get the same look from each of them. I'll be honest with you, I love the Metal Lust palette, but I didn't think it was that groundbreaking. Like, it's mattes and shimmers. It's a great palette. It's good quality. And I think a lot of people just really love these tones, but I think that you can get a similar look from the Mario palette. The biggest difference being with the Tom Ford Metal Lust, once again, you are not getting that wet, glossy look from the shimmers in that palette. You knew we had to compare these. Up next, I have the Natasha Denona Glam palette. We have these shades. If you have the Glam palette, you really do have most of these shades. This is a really good non-glitter option. If you are not feeling the glitter, if you want less mess, if you're worried about your eyes getting irritated, then the Natasha Denona Glam palette is a really great option. A lot of you guys already have this palette and we just kind of forget that it is just so similar to other things. I would say the biggest difference between these palettes is that the Glam palette, you have some more cool toned options. So if you were looking at the Mario wishing it was more cool tone, you already got that in the Natasha Denona Glam palette. And also the Natasha palette does not have those rich chocolate browns that you get from the Mario palette. If you're looking at the Mario palette and you're thinking, this is way too expensive, this is not worth it, this is not within my budget, even with the discount from the Sephora sale that just ended, I really just don't want to do it. Well, there are some similar options from Colourpop. I have a pretty big Colourpop collection. I don't really talk about it much on my channel, but I'm perfectly happy with the Colourpop formula. I like my palettes, and one of the ones that is probably the closest to this is the Colourpop Going Coconuts collection. Now, I don't think that the Colourpop palette is as good quality. I definitely don't think the mattes are as good, but you're getting a very similar color scheme, and I think these ones from Colourpop are only like 15 bucks or something like that. You're also not getting the same sparkle and ethereal look. It's a neutral palette. Like, these both are neutral palettes, so we can get very similar looks from a lot of the ones that I'm talking about today, but I'm just trying to point out some of these smaller nuances and differences. I also wanted to show you as well, I have the Stone Cold Fox palette, and I also have the Bare Necessities palette from Colourpop. While I love these palettes, I don't really pull out my mega palettes all that much. They're a little bit cumbersome and I kind of forget about them. But that being said, if you're someone that just wants tons of value and you want a lot of options, maybe you just want one palette that does literally every single kind of neutral look you want, these are amazing, and they usually have a lot of great deals around the holiday time on Colourpop. I also received some requests to compare up against Dior Soft Cashmere. This quint gets compared literally all the time in all of my videos, and I think that this is great if you want a sophisticated, cool toned alternative to the Mario one. You have some really beautiful topper shades in here, and the metallics that are in this quint are much more high shine than a lot of the other Dior quints. So I think this is really great if you wanted something smaller, maybe, I don't know, arguably a little bit more mature and with less fallout and kick up. Next up, we have a comparison with one of the Pat McGrath 5-pan palettes that came out this holiday season. This is the one that has kind of like the neutral grays and blacks. Some of the shades in here are similar, but the formulas are very different. The new Pat McGrath formula that is in this palette is much creamier and a little bit more high shine than the ones that we get from Mario. Lastly, I was kind of surprised by this, but a lot of you asked me to compare this palette up against the Charlotte Tilbury Pillow Talk palette. And I didn't really understand that because that palette is so pink tone, but once I put them side by side, I could kind of tell a little bit more about what you guys are talking about, so I'm kind of glad I'm doing this comparison. That being said, the Charlotte Tilbury Pillow Talk quad, it is much more pink. There's some colors that kind of match up a little bit. I mostly wanted to show you guys what these shimmers look like side by side. So I have one of the glossy shimmers from the Mario palette, and then I have that shimmery, more of like a sparkly topper shade from the Charlotte Tilbury one. And I think the Mario one, it definitely is more impactful. It has more shine, it's more pearlized. But that being said, they are fairly similar. Woo! Okay, friends, I hope that all those comparisons, the swatches, the demo, I hope that they were all helpful. Now I'm gonna summarize everything as I do in my final thoughts. And I'm gonna tell you guys what I like about this palette, because there's lots of things that I like, and then I'm also gonna tell you what I don't really like and the considerations that I think you should have. Let's start off with the positive. What are the things that I like about this palette? First off, obviously, the color scheme is really beautiful. It's very accessible. I think that this has appealed to so many people because it is a neutral palette. And it's funny because in the beauty community, we kind of groan sometimes when people put out neutral palettes that we've seen time and time again. But then at the same time, this palette at the moment of me filming this video is sold out at Sephora. Like, everybody is going bonkers over this palette. I guess because it's just a very usable color story. I think anybody can look beautiful in this palette. I also think this is gonna work for a lot of skin tones. I also, like I said in the beginning, I love the packaging. I think it is makeup artist chic. This really reminds me of Mario. The color story makes me think of Mario. This really is his aesthetic. Let's be honest. He loves that neutral, contoured, chisel, very sophisticated kind of look. In fact, the shimmer shades that are in here, they remind me a lot of that Met Gala look that he did for Kim Kardashian when she did the outfit that literally made her look like she was dripping wet. He did the makeup for that. I still think that is like one of the best makeup looks that I've ever seen on a red carpet. And this palette and the glossy shimmers really reminded me of that look. And finally, I cannot deny every single look that I get with this palette is beautiful. I've gotten a lot of compliments the past week with me using this palette. I've done many different looks. I've played with every single one of the shades. I've done eyeliner, no eyeliner, different mascaras, building up the colors, using the glossy shimmers in different ways. And so many times I've gotten compliments from friends and family and just like, you know, people at cafes, etc. So I really do think that anybody can create a beautiful look with this palette, and that's something that I think is wonderful. That being said, when we talk about the considerations around this palette, everyone can use it and everyone can create beautiful looks. because it's a neutral palette, because neutrals really do look good on everybody. I don't think that this color story is groundbreaking. I think it's great for people that maybe don't have a go-to neutral palette. But as you guys saw in the comparisons, there are a lot of dupes out there. A lot of the palettes that I showed you guys today are ones that I know many of you have in your collection. And if you're somebody that's not really a makeup collector, you might have one of them because they are pretty popular. Looking at each of the formulas, first off with the mattes, this isn't my favorite matte formula. It's a little bit too powdery for me. I have gotten used to working with it. The first time I used it, I wasn't a fan at all. I really wasn't pleased. That was my first impression, was like, whoa, super powdery, a little bit difficult to blend. There are a lot of other matte formulas that I enjoy more than this. The Viseart, the Wayne Goss, Natasha Denona, Pat McGrath, all of those luxury brands I feel top this formula. And those are typically more expensive brands, so that's kind of expected. But I'll be honest, I also just prefer like Anastasia Beverly Hills mattes better than this. I know some people might say, well, Sophia, this is called the Ethereal palette. They're not supposed to be super pigmented. They're supposed to be super blendy. But my response to that is when you look at the description of this palette, it says suede mattes offer enhanced grip for rich color. And I don't really think I'm getting that from these. They're not the worst. They aren't the worst, but I'm just saying, I don't think they are the kind of mattes that I would typically think I would see in a $68 palette. Last thing about the mattes, like I kind of alluded to earlier in the video, I wish there was a black. I wish there was a deeper shade in this palette. It just kind of seems like a miss for me. We have a really nice gradation of mattes in here, but I think that we probably could have removed one of the mid-tone ones and added in a black or a super, super deep chocolate brown for people like me that like to create smokier looks, or for those of my friends out there that have deeper skin tones. Now for the metallics. These are nice. They're nice. They're nice, but they're not like the best. I don't have a huge problem with them. The lighter one right here, the silvery tone one, it can get a little bit chunky, so you have to be careful not to get fallout. But in general, these are nice. I don't think they're the best metallic formula in the world. I think that I probably like the ones from that new little Pat McGrath 5-pan better than these. They're creamier, they're smoother. You know, in general, I like Natasha Denona better than these. They're good, they're just not the best. I would say my biggest gripe with them is just the fact that they're both pretty dark. I don't really get why we need to have 3 of these glossy shimmers that all look pretty much the same, but then we only get 2 metallics. I think this would have been much better if we had, number 1, like I said, taken out one of the mattes, added in a black, and number 2, taken out one of these glossy shimmers and added, you know, basically the same color but in a more opaque metallic format. Lastly, the glossy shimmers. These are stunning. They're stunning, but like I've shown you in the comparisons, there are similar ones out there. This is not like a new thing. Other brands have been doing this. Poor Wayne Goss, like he basically has the same thing and like nobody's talking about them. I like the fact that I get more options here than in a Wayne Goss palette. I can create more looks. But that being said, like I said before, you know, these have been done before. They're really beautiful, but I only think that we needed 2. Also, I have heard from a lot of people out there that they are getting irritation with these shades, which is really sad because it's kind of the most beautiful part of this palette. For me, you know, sometimes I use this and I get absolutely no irritation at all, and then sometimes I wake up and I do. I have very sensitive eyes. It's getting cooler out, and as soon as the weather changes, my eyes get kind of irritated. So I can't say that they've particularly irritated my eyes, but it's something that I think you need to think about and watch out for if you have sensitive eyes. If anything, like I said earlier, use a wet brush, use some glitter glue. That's really gonna help them stay in place to prevent the glitter from falling into your eye. So what do I think of this palette? You know what? I don't think it's luxury, but I think it's pretty close. I think with some key edits, this could have been a really great palette, but it's just not my favorite. While I think all of the looks that I create are beautiful, I don't really get the same enjoyment using this palette as I do with most of the ones that I showed you guys in the comparisons. I don't think this is something that you need to rush out to buy. If you got it, don't feel bad. Don't feel bad It's still a beautiful palette, but I just don't think that it's worth $68. I have an issue with each of the formulas in here. I have an issue with the number of formulas that we have in each shade in this palette. It's beautiful, but it really isn't the greatest thing since fresh bread. You don't need to run out and get it. The last thing that I want to say is that, I don't think I mentioned this in the beginning, sorry guys, but this is a limited release. I didn't know that when it first launched. I really don't understand why this is a limited release. I would think that this would be a best-selling staple from Mario. It just sold out at Sephora, and so I'm really curious, is this going to become permanent? Comment down below and let me know what you think. I don't really understand why this would be limited release unless maybe it's particularly expensive to create. I have no idea. Like, why wouldn't you keep this around? It's so much more different than his other palettes, which I never got. They never really appealed to me, to be honest. It's so much better than those, so I don't really understand that. But enough about what I think. I want to hear what you all think. So sound off in those comments down below. A lot of you have already told me your first impressions of this palette. Some of you guys ordered it and you hadn't tried it yet. I would love to know, did you get it? Do you like it? If you didn't get it, are you gonna get it? Did I sway you? Did I change your mind? And also, was this video helpful? If this video was helpful and if you liked it, please don't forget to give me a big thumbs up. It really helps me out. I'm pretty much covered in glitter from swatching all those things this morning, so I would appreciate your thumbs up. And if you haven't subscribed to my channel already, what are you waiting for? Click that subscribe button to join our fam. We have so much fun on this channel. And if you're not sure, that's totally okay. Head on over to my channel page so you can see some of my other videos, see if you like my content, and then maybe we can be friends. I hope that you guys are having a fantastic day, and I will see you in my next one. Goodbye.